Welcome to the 23rd episode of Explained, where we're always pushing boundaries and reaching new heights on this series. For example, this episode definitely takes the all-time award for least descriptive title in the entire series. I mean, at least with other episode titles, you had some idea of what went on, even if you've never heard of it before. Like, there was a hoax and it happened on Berners Street, or there's a place called Sealand and it's a principality, or there's a pit with money in it on an island somewhere. But if you look at this title, and not the thumbnail mind you, you have no context. Big piece of what exactly? Big piece of cake? Big piece of platinum? Well, no, to be honest, I'm pretending not to know for the sake of introduction, because it's a piece of something I love, but don't cover that often. Yeah, it's the Titanic. I love the Titanic. I love the Titanic so much, I'm just going to skip over talking about how much I love the Titanic in order to start explaining it as soon as possible. So, let's go. The big piece is a 20-ton section of Titanic's hull from mostly C and partially D deck, just aft of the third funnel. Just around there-ish. The piece would have been part of cabins C-79 and 81, and a tiny bit of the first-class galley on D-deck, but the D-deck section was cut off, because it was a bit awkward when they were displaying it. Don't worry about it. Like some, but not all of the wreck, it's actually pretty well preserved, with glass still being in the majority of the portholes. I mean, it's nothing special when compared to some parts of the wreck, but it's pretty damn good, especially when you consider what it actually went through to get here today, including the breakup of the ship, multiple free falls to the seabed, and a permanent housing in a pyramid in the middle of a desert. Yeah, but hey, now it's time to explain how it got there, because that's just generally what I do, after all. Its story starts in Belfast, where an educated guest puts the casting and placement of the steel for what was to become the big piece around 1910 by Dalzell and D. Covilles and Co., then delivery to Holland and Wolff's slipway and massive gantry in the heart of Belfast just afterwards. Like seriously, those gantries are massive. The shell of the ship itself, as well as the piece, were launched from the slipway just after noon on the 31st of May 1911, and was entirely finished by the 2nd of April 1912, still docked in Belfast. It then conducted sea trials over the course of 12 hours, and then managed to finally make it to Southampton by the 4th of April, where she docked. On the 10th at noon, the Titanic departed with 922 passengers on her maiden voyage. But I guess that's a redundant name because it was her only voyage. Oh well, first to Cherbourg in France, though not to the actual quayside because she was too big, employing smaller ships to ferry oncoming passengers to the ship instead, and then to Queenstown, now known as that, before heading to New York City on the 11th of April. Anyway, you can probably guess what happens next, and in case you're worrying about the people in C-79 and C-81, which you probably aren't, these cabins were uninhabited during the entire voyage. No one ever used them as far as I can tell, so yeah, that's kind of a waste. On the 14th at 11:40, which is 2:07 the next day for Greenwich Mean Time, the Titanic took a glancing blow from an iceberg. However, the first 90% of the sinking is totally irrelevant for our purposes, and we will skip over it. Seriously, this video shows it happen in real time, and if you want to watch it all, it is ridiculous how much of the nearly 3 hours was spent just sitting there looking a bit lower in the water than usual. Oh well. We skip forward to what was for the longest time a very controversial part of the sinking, but really I think has been settled quite recently: the breakup. Around 2:19, a minute before the whole thing is fully submerged, the ship breaks its back around the third funnel. Third funnel? Wait a minute, where was C-79 and 81 again? In between that and the fourth funnel. That is dangerously close. That is a matter of a couple feet. So what would happen? Would it break up? Would it be connected to the stern? I guess it would be connected to the stern, but there's two things to keep in mind with this. One, the breakup wasn't clean. If it was perfectly sliced, the stern would have stayed afloat for another couple hours, and maybe even permanently. So obviously the breakup wasn't that clean. And number two, the stern's hydrodynamics. Okay, so the bow, the front bit, is designed to cut through the water, which it does so as it sinks, like a bullet. But the bits that weren't shaped like a bullet, like the flat wheelhouse, were physically ripped off by the resistance. That's why there's nothing there now. So if a shape like this gets loads of material ripped off it anyway as it goes forward, what about this shape? Yeah, coupled with the massive empty spaces like the aft grand staircase and the forward end of the engine room, means that most of the broken section of the stern was completely torn away. This and the fact that the stern hasn't completely filled with water, meaning this section exploded and imploded on the way down, made it look like this. Yeah, this is what hydrodynamics will do to you, kids. Be wary. If we lay the bow and stern next to each other how they originally were, you can see this massive section missing. A section that contains our piece, so where did it go? Well, it obviously came off as the stern sank, or on the way down, and as a result ended up in a field in between the two filled with debris, called the debris field. I wonder why. This is why I've been saying it's in pretty good nick having gone through all that, and there is quite a lot more to come, bear that in mind. Regardless, here it stayed for 80 years, so we can fast forward that bit. Don't worry, nothing really important happened in the 20th century. Oh wait, no, I already used that joke, damn it. Oh well, sorry guys. In 1986, after decades of mystery, the remains of the most famous ship on Earth were found by Robert Ballard, and so started a massive period of salvage and recovery for the wreck, which is somewhat controversial because it's also a graveyard for thousands of people. Like, seriously, there's a body right there and another one there. These are people, but hey, whatever, it doesn't matter, I guess. During this period, tens of thousands of artifacts were recovered, including this piece of coal here, but we as humans decided to go further. We tend to have a habit of doing that. They thought, what if we could physically raise a section of Titanic itself, and not just the objects inside? It may not even be possible anymore for a complete refloat with the current state of the ship, but hey, we fantasized about raising the Titanic for literally decades. Maybe there's a way around it. Well, as a compromise between practicality, preservation, and fantasy, the RMS Titanic Incorporated, the company responsible for many of the recovered artifacts, decided to try and raise the Titanic, or at least part of it. In order to avoid potential damage to the bow or stern sections, the company reasonably decided to instead refloat a section already separated from the main two wrecks. That's our big piece. But how did they lift that 20-ton piece of metal? Buoyancy, that's how. It's pretty easy. Since divers would be crushed instantly at that depth, chains were attached carefully around the portholes by submarine claws in order to create some sort of makeshift harness to lift it by, so it doesn't break in half and ruin the whole operation. Meanwhile, massive buoyancy balloons were lowered down with massive scrap metal counterweights, which are just to counteract each balloon's nearly 4-ton pull. However, in this situation, air wouldn't work because it was compressible, and at that depth it would implode, just like the stern, bit awkward, which isn't very good, so they used diesel instead. Unusual choice, I know, but think about it logically. It's incompressible and it's a lot more buoyant than water, which is what you need, so why not? After being sunk down into the piece, the balloons are attached to the harness and then the scrap ballast is released. It should go whoosh, right? Well, not quite. First, diesel leaked from one of the balloons, which was soon replaced. Then the transponder didn't work for a while. Then it did, and the whole piece rose a few hundred feet, but went back down again because another bag came free. Oh well, skip forward to the next day. The bag was replaced and all the transponders were triggered in order to release the ballast and make it float. This time everything worked, and taking half an hour to retrace the route it taken 84 years earlier, orange buoyancy bags were spotted off the bow of the awaiting ship on the surface, to the cheers of many people on the ship, including Buzz Aldrin, who was there apparently, so that's cool. It had finally worked. We had raised part of the Titanic, which is pretty damn awesome. Except, nope, because 2 days into the towing to New York, the line snapped and this 20-ton piece fell miles back down to the seabed. For what, like the third time? Second, third? I've lost track. The piece landed upright with the transponder still attached, just 10 miles from the rest of the Titanic, where it stayed for 2 years. Yes, in 1998, after finishing off whatever they deemed more important than raising the Titanic, they finally got around to relifting it this time, and successfully too. The piece was then shipped to Santa Fe in the United States, where it underwent restoration until the new millennium, and then it was placed on permanent exhibition in a massive pyramid in the middle of a desert, known by the locals as the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas. Or is it paradise? Oh well. To this day, the section christened the Big Piece is the biggest section of Titanic ever lifted, and it looks like it will hold that record in perpetuity. There are no plans to retrieve anything bigger. So, that's the end, right? I mean, we've reached the present and we don't know what comes next, so I better end the video, right? Well, to be honest, we kind of do know what's coming next. With care, the Big Piece looks like it could last thousands of years. But the ship won't. These wrecks look frozen in time permanently, but in reality it's more like collapsing in slow motion. It is being corroded and eroded and knocked around by accident-prone salvages, that's why the crow's nest disappeared, and even being eaten by bacteria. That's what all these thin icicle-looking things are. In 100 years, potentially within your lifetime, the ship will look drastically different. A few more of those centuries and all that will be left of the ship of dreams will be a faint orange stain on the bottom of the Atlantic. To your 10th great-grandchildren, provided you have them, the Titanic in the past might look like this and this, but their Titanic, the Titanic that exists in the present for them, might look like that. And really, in my opinion, this preservation is the real triumph of the story here. Thank you for watching.